Hey guys, Infidel1258 here. Today I want to talk to you about which are my favorite Chaos Legion legendary summoners. I think the Dragon's going to be the winner, but we haven't even heard about it, we haven't seen it. That's my prediction. But in the meantime, I had a conversation with my members only, and the question was raised, out of these three summoners, he was looking at Wraith and Yasic and Immortalis, which would you max out first? And then it begs the question, like, which is most powerful, and how does one even decide, not just by power level or not, but actually what are the considerations within your own deck that would make you go one way or the other? It's a complicated topic, and I think it's important for new players to understand this sort of thought process, because it's going to inform whether you buy one summoner or another, one monster or another, whether you buy old cards or new cards. This sort of thought process can impact your every step and stage in Splinterlands. So I hope you'll stick around and stay tuned with me on this one, and special thanks to Suelis for the conversation. He's going to get a raffle ticket for this comment, and that means he's going to have an opportunity to win a plot of land. If you want an opportunity to win a plot of land from me this year, then drop comments that turn into videos, and then you will. Okay guys, leave it there. Thanks a lot. Have an amazing day. God bless. Try to decide which Chaos Legion legendary summoner to max first, Wraith, Yasic, or Immortalis. Okay, let's talk about that. Everything's budget concerned, right? Like, it's hard to think, it depends on where you're at. It depends on what your deck is like. But just generally speaking, like, if it really was a coin flip between Wraith, Yasic, Immortalis, like let's assume you have the money for one and you can't get two. Let's assume your deck for the red, white, and green are all the same. Wraith, Yasic, Immortalis. Let's pop over to Peak Monsters. Okay, we go Legendary, we go Summoner. Chaos Legion. Regular Foil. Oh man, it's so dependent. So yes, it's so dependent on what cards you have access to, but I don't want to pull up your deck and kind of speak directly into it. I want to speak generally, both for so that you might take I guess something from the conversation, and then maybe even like build a tool set for how you could think generally about these topics in the future, but also then it could be maybe clipped and used for the audience as a whole to recognize these sorts of distinctions for themselves. So deciding between Wraith, Yasic, and Immortalis. I mean, conversation first probably starts with, like, do I even agree that these are the ones that you should be spending money on? And what are the price points? And is one of them cheaper than the others? Looking at, and then do you have DC? There's so many little things, like, do you have DC that you can be patiently high bidding on? Because, like, look, high bid is 10% cheaper, but is that 10%? No, it's not quite 10%. Maybe 7% cheaper. Still discount, right? If you could be patient, that's going to add up. You need 11 copies. You're going to save, maybe you can save 10 bucks, 10, 11 bucks. But my first reaction is that I really feel they serve so many different purposes. And I think they're probably all really, one day you're going to say to yourself, I wish I had them all. So that's, like, worth saying. I would personally be including these two in and frankly all of them in the conversation. Quicks has got a lot of opportunities to be really successful, especially now that 4 mana as a summoner level is actually on the low side, right? We now have lots of 4 manas. Like, 4 is pretty either standard or low, and so Quicks becomes that much more appetizing. And you didn't mention him. Plus he's dragon. Plus he's cheaper. So there's that. And then, you also got to look at the gold foils too. You only need 4 of these guys if you're trying to max out. Maybe you do. Quicks would be 90. Theoretically, you get this for about 400 bucks, maybe 360. Whereas you get this for probably 200. So I guess maybe you stay with the regulars. But it's always worth it to look at that gold foil side. But if you really want to exclude these, and I think these are very powerful, but if you really just, you don't have that deck, okay, you need to recognize that first and foremost. You got to understand where your strengths are. What cards do I have that are really successful and possibly carry, that will allow me to lean into, for instance, white or red or green or blue or whatever, and therefore I want to equip that even more with a certain summoner. So if you've got some key tanks on that white team, if you are sitting on, for instance, cards like Silver Shield Paladin, which is in my opinion, one of the best tanks in the whole game. It's in the conversation. It's got the shield, it's got the magic reflect, it's got good armor and hit points, it's got decent damage, it's got a really low mana cost. And then with Wraith, it ends up having, right, you're not just 9 hit points, you're 13. Plus you can add new armor onto this thing through Protect on the white team quite easily. So I love this card for that mana cost. I love it. So if you've got cards like Paladin, if you've got cards like Silver Shield Sheriff, that is a very powerful sniper, and it has Protect, which again is so key when you have Wraith, you start to build a picture for why Wraith would be really powerful. These are thoughts you have to look at. What cards do I have on the white team that would really synergize super well with Wraith and therefore make Wraith a standout? And you would do this with each of those splinters that you're considering. You don't just say, oh, for instance, and not to say that your question implied this, but it can never be about which one is the most powerful, like which one is the most overpowered. What is the meta? People like speed, therefore Yasic. No, hold on. What's your fire deck like? People like Wraith, it's super powerful. Well, hang on. Do you have any tanks that have armor? Do you have any protect monsters on your white team? If not, Wraith is just not going to... Do you have any resurrect on that white team? If not, Wraith isn't going to be as impactful for you. If you don't have fast melee monsters on your fire team, because I don't love the scatter shot play. If you don't have fast, powerful melee monsters with opportunity or sneak, things like Kobold Miner, things like the Serpentine Spy, things like maybe Serpentine Soldier. Or then alternatively, that's one angle with the Wraith. Sorry, with the Yasic. But alternatively, if you have like 2 or 3 or 4 blast monsters on the fire team, for instance, Elemental Phoenix, Fire Demon, Mortius is another opportunity card, melee card that'll work really well with Yasic. But yeah, there's like blast monsters on this team that can be absolutely nasty with that scatter shot, because it's going to avoid the taunt. Sinesh is one of them. Elemental Phoenix is one of them. Fire Demon's one of them. And I showed you, I used one. Fire Elemental is one of them. I used it earlier. And those cards, even though they're all really low hit points, can drop insane bombs. And they're blast bombs. And then they're going to land in the back line because of the scatter shot. And they're going to hit 2 or 3 monsters at a time. And I find that that's an interesting play. But the question is, do you even have those monsters to try that play? And then if you had those blasters, do you also have those melee monsters I talked about, the opportunities and the sneaks? Because then you can do 2 main tanks, a main tank, a secondary tank, opportunity, sneak, and it can be an absolutely nasty, you're way faster than your opponent because of the Yasic speed, plus all of those monsters I showed you are quick in and of themselves. And so you hit first and you hit hard and you finish them off. That's a cool play. And if you had that combination of monsters already, then that starts to make a card like Yasic really stand out for me. But again, Wraith is maybe the one where my heart starts like really leaning in. But it's not just, hey, Wraith is awesome, he's my favorite of those 3. It's, again, what do you have among the protect monsters? because you better have some of these guys on your team, or it becomes less important to have a Grandmaster Wraith. Because once you add the armor that these 3 cards are going to be offering you onto the Grandmaster Wraith, you're adding potentially 6 new hit points to every monster on the team, and they're going to reflect magic, or maybe not reflect, but they're going to absorb magic because of that void armor. Dude, that's broken. That is so powerful. And for me, Grandmaster Wraith just is the best of those 3. But I spent a couple minutes articulating a real powerful use case for Yasic also, and 2 different ways of using him. I feel there's really one main way of using him. It's like taking advantage of the armor, taking advantage of probably a taunt, and then funneling the damages into that one area with massive armor, and bringing repairs and bringing resurrects. So if you have those cards on that white team, that is the one sort of main play with this thing. Whereas if you have Yasic, you've got a couple different options, but they're way more vulnerable. It's like a glass cannon versus like a super defensible, long-lasting team. But one more comparison here before we talk about Immortalis, because I do have thoughts here also. I do think these are probably the 2 that I'd be most interested in, but we'll talk about Immortalis next. But hey, this is the team I'm talking about creating here is really like a 30 to 50 mana team. And the team I'm talking about creating here is potentially, you could do cool Yasic teams that are 12 hit points. 12 mana. And I'm talking like Yasic with, for instance, let's pull up these cards. Yasic with Efreet Elder is really, really pretty cool. Or, you get into like a Serb and like there's just some really nasty low mana cards on here. You bring Serb and Serpentine Spy and Cobalt Miner, and you're in for like 6, 11, 6, 10, 15 mana. There's just some really nasty cards on this team that are very low mana. And bringing speed to them can make them almost unhittable and make you hit first, which can, often win you matches. And so I feel that's one more distinction between the 2. You get into a conversation of where like, if you have the right cards, this is potentially a low mana play. If you have the right cards to support this guy, you're talking usually like a medium to higher mana play, and then it's going to really be shining in those with the shield bearer and that big taunt. This guy, shield bearer, is so key. If you don't have that card, frankly, I don't know that I would really even be considering Wraith. And then let's go over to Immortalis. I mean, Immortalis to me is the worst of these 3, and again, I say that acknowledging it does have value and usefulness, and I think you're going to want it one day. I think everyone's going to say that is here now, and seeing $20 Immortalis is going to be very frustrated that they don't own one in a year or 2 when this, because I think these prices go, I don't know, $100 each maybe one day. They're too good, man. If this game has a future, these cards are too good, and they will diminish in supply as we start to delete some of those extra packs, and we're even doing it now, right? Between the 25,000 every day and now 500,000 are going to be sold. We'll talk more about this in a minute. Let's almost talk about the 500,000 packs they're giving to Nifty Arcade, almost as a separate conversation. But I just want to drop that nugget here because that's part of the conversation for why these cards will appreciate one day, because those packs they're part of. We've talked about how there's gonna be like 3 million packs that are just being held, and that's gonna hold prices low. Well, that's 500,000 packs that are gonna be opened, and yeah, they're gonna be put into circulation, and you might argue they're gonna contend with you on rental costs. I don't want to fully have that conversation now. Let's have that as a separate moment, but I bring it up now because I think it speaks to these cards are going to appreciate, and you're going to regret not having each of them, because you're going to say right now that it's like $20. That's tough to get them all. Okay, but like when they're $100, it's going to become, is that impossible? Maybe it is impossible for you at that point. So I like it. I think it's like an almost necessary card. It has a lot of usefulness. I use it a fair amount, but to me, it doesn't compare to these two and sort of what they could do, and how these ones, in my opinion, will win you a match. Whereas the moments where the Immortalis is going to do that, to me, is fewer and far between. I like it, of course, in the rule set where it's magic only. I like it in the rule set where it's monsters lose all their back to basics. That's what it's called. Where monsters lose all their abilities, because often magic is one of the things your opponent will try. And then also in that same rule set, people will try to put armor on their monsters. They'll pick monsters that have higher armor, so that if you bring any archers, because people will, they'll bring one archer or two archers, because they don't have enough magic monsters. So if you bring archers, they're going to hit the armor. So Immortalis is going to shatter that. He's going to be resistant to your magic play. He's also going to nerf the heart, but that's not as big a deal. So I like this card in several key rule sets. But to me, it doesn't compare to even these guys, let alone these guys. But again, it's not just which card is the best or which card is the, I probably like Wraith the most out of the ones you've described. And Yasic's probably number 2, and Immortalis is number 3. But who cares which one I like most, or even what the price is, if this is the best deal, if you don't have the cards to support it. So with Immortalis, the conversation becomes like, well, what do you have on that green team? And what sort of key cards might be really important to have if that's going to be your intention for maxing out. Well, I guess, you're going to want to be focusing in on, one of the powerful things that I see out of this card is that Void can transform a vulnerable tank into a really resilient tank. And the Shatter can be a nice counter in a lot of situations to, like, for instance, a Wraith. So, it's got a lot going for it. But I think I want to think through what sort of tanks would benefit from this guy. And it's going to be cards like Pelacor Mercenary that are quite resilient. They have the flying, the heal, the retaliate. They're quite strong, good amount of hit points. This thing is vulnerable to magic, though. If you throw a Void on this thing, it's a whole other tank. So cards like Pelacor Mercenary that don't have Void, Nectar Queen is another example, Lycan Beast, Harvester. Nobody plays with Harvester or Lycan Beast, but they're both strong. Hill Giant in those low mana matches. There's just a ton of tanks here. That Rexy is another one, especially with the trample rule sets that happen. You bring a Rexy and you put him with the Immortalis, and suddenly he's resilient enough that he can survive long enough to maybe get a trample off or two, and that can be quite powerful. Bramble Pixie's another example. So there's a ton of tanks here. If you have them, you would really love to slip a Void on there, and then that's going to make you so much more resilient. And if your tank stays alive longer, then your backline, which is usually putting out damage or supporting in a really significant way, are going to be able to do their thing. And so that's the question. Like, what tanks do you have, and how could you really utilize that Void? And I think that's the first part of the picture, but then you need to then look for silence support to really lean into your own strength. And so then do you have these cards? Because these are the cards that are going to bring down your opponent's magic and maximize your own benefit from that Void, right? Goblin Psychic, I'm sure you have this one. It's a newer card. Most people are going to have, but do you have it all the way up here at 150 at level 7? That silence is going to be key, because it's actually going to bring down their damage output if they're using magic. And assuming, if you're using Immortalis, you're probably assuming you're right. Like, it's almost a counterplay card, and that's why it's number 3 on the list for me. But if you recognize your opponent's propensity to play magic damage, then you have to come prepared with cards like Immortalis that supply your own team with Void, and you have to come prepared with Goblin Psychic with that silence, because you're going to reduce their damage output. Mushroom Seer is so amazing, and this card used to be way more expensive. As you know, cards price has been dropping. Get this thing up, like level 1 does the silence, man. Now, I'm really reluctant to say get level 1. It's just too slow. You're really only bringing it for the silence at that point. With all the phase that exists now, the 1 speed is just not going to work. 3 hit points is too vulnerable to an opportunity. But if you get this card up in here, the poison makes this thing a whole other danger. Like, this is a good card, man. And like, you're talking $200 for a max level 1. And so it's not cheap. You're talking, you brought the question forward, like how do I choose which one to max? Well, some of the key cards are not going to be cheap to get into the higher levels, but they're so important to the picture of what that card would require to really maximally be efficient, right? Sorcerer is maybe an alternative. We're talking 46 copies at $3. It's about $150, maybe $170. Oh, you can get $250 for a copy, for a few copies, and you get your silence up here at 20 copies. And this might be permissible. I love the affliction though, dude. Like that. So these 3 cards are super powerful. And not only are they powerful, but like they lean into what Immortalis would be achieving. Not just from the silence perspective, but totally that's part of it. But also from the, damage output. Because if you're picking an Immortalis, part of what you're doing is counterplaying your opponent. You're hoping they're playing magic and you're going to just really resist that. You're going to outlast that. You're going to be resilient to it. But you're then making a choice to not do as much damage because Immortalis doesn't buff your damage. He just nerfs essentially what the opponent could theoretically do to you. So you need to come prepared with things like poison and things like affliction and rust and shatter, which Immortalis offers. And over here, again, we have the affliction, the spelled, and those are going to be damage. They're gonna not the dispel, but the affliction, the poison, the rust are going to be essentially damage doers for you, like damage output. Whether it's the poison ticking away at your opponent, whether it's the rust literally removing 2 armor from them, or whether it's the what was the other one? The affliction preventing heal. It's just diminishing, it's hurting your opponent. And then dispel too is even going to nerf them in another way, but that's not exactly a damage output. It's just like it's part of the picture of how you would win though. So these cards are pretty well must-have in my opinion if you're running an Immortalis, and then any of those tanks, or maybe a multitude of those tanks we talked about. So I feel as though this one is like a response card. The Immortalis is a response card. I don't love it as much. I think it's actually weaker than these 2. Wraith feels a bit responsey too, but it's so versatile. If you've got that 40 or 50 mana, Wraith becomes it's so easy to put together the shield bearer with that taunt in the first position. You bring out some of those protects we talked about. You bring out a couple resurrects, and you build a team that's doing significant damage, usually snipe damage, maybe sneak damage. You bring a couple repairs, maybe resurrects, and that taunt with the shield bearer is so powerful, it will get you out of that usually. I find that wins a lot. Yasic has a lot more options because the speed is really quite versatile, but it's always a glass cannon. So if you don't finish your opponent in that first round, the Yasic's not going to work for you because you're going to come with these 2 and 3 and 4 mana, 2 and 3 and 4 hit point monsters that will get deleted if the opponent gets a shot. And so I like this one the most, but again, it just boils down to what's your deck look like, and you need to look for those things for yourself. Because this conversation won't be the last time you ask this, right? It's like, the next set of summoners are going to come out right now. Soon we're going to get a dragon summoner, like in a few weeks, guys. We're getting that dragon summoner, and that might change the whole picture. But it always boils down to the conversation that you need to have with yourself is really just, what are the cards that I have that would lean into what does this summoner do that would allow, what's its win condition, and what cards do I have that would lean into that win condition? And if I don't have those, are they relatively affordable versus the same conversation for him and him and him and him? And I think if you'd sleep in on these ones, you might be making a mistake because I do like them a lot. I think they're quite strong in their own ways too. That'd have to be almost a separate video, but I think, oh man, Possibilis is great in so many situations. Even though they recently nerfed Opportunity, and that was a problem for him, is this kind of an indirect nerf for Possibilis. Quix is you know, a bit older, and I feel people are sleeping on him because he's just like, he's not one of these cool new ones. But man, 4 mana is now like low, and that's 2 more mana with which to pick monsters from. Plus Dragon, right? Dragon opens the door for a whole bunch of new choices. And then Astral. This is really crazy. The dodge working so well with certain monsters can be, in my opinion, he's my favorite of the whole picture here. Like I actually like him the most. It's like, for me, it's Astral, then Wraith, then Yasic, then Possibilis. Oh, it's hard to say though, because I kind of, as I get there, I'm like, well, what about Quix? Is he really number 5? Maybe I like Quix more than Possibilis. I don't know. It's something like that. And he's last. So that's how I feel. What do you guys think? I'm going back to where we left off and trying to see if anybody else dropped any comments on this stuff. And if you have any fresh comments about what I've said here about these summoners, you feel I'm off with the listing, let me know. But I do think it's probably Astral, then Wraith, then Yasic, and then I get a bit muddy on the last 3. And then the Dragon one to me is going to skip right to the top. When that one's released, I feel confident about that. Suelis says, I know, so hard to decide. Yeah. I do think I'll be able to max at least 3 before Chaos Legion is over. That's good. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to want to miss the Dragon one. I haven't even seen it. I have no knowledge of it, but I feel confident they're going to come hard with that Dragon Summoner. And it's going to just skip to the top. Like I feel really confident about that. Like it's a speculation, but I feel confident about that speculation. Okay, so you got Quix. That's good. I like Possibilis and Astral, but I think they will make me win that much. I don't think they will make me win that much more. My Water and Death feel strong. Okay, yeah, that's a great consideration. It sounds like you're thinking through again the toolkit you already have, and you're trying to move the needle maximally. The question is really not just which one is best, but which one will help you most now. I think Wraith will go the furthest for me at the moment. Or Yasic, Appreciate your thoughts. Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll make that a video, and I'll definitely give you one of the raffle tickets for the land. I think I'm like 120 raffle tickets or something given away. So I said at 250. So we're actually getting pretty close. Maybe it'll be 2 or 3 months from now, and then we'll give away a plot of land. Bobby says, I'm liking Possibilis more and more every day. Me too, dude. That's the one I kind of lean on. Like, I look for opportunities to use it. Whereas with, Astral too, I look for opportunities to use it, and Possibilis. All of the other ones on the screen, I wait for opportunities. Do you see the distinction there? It's like, I'm actively seeking opportunities to take advantage of the trample with Possibilis and that reach and the cool synergies that can happen there, or the resurrect with the dodge and the speed on Astral. I'm looking, like, actively seeking to play those two, whereas the other ones I'm waiting for a certain scenario that I know they'll strive and succeed at.